Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. My name is Jennifer Pinsoff, and I'm a staff attorney at the Electronic Frontier Foundation, and I'll be the moderator for today's discussion. First, a few quick housekeeping things. We'll be recording this session, and only video of our official speakers will be included. You can join us now in the official chat on Twitch at eff.org/livestream. For those using Privacy Badger, you can enable chat on Twitch by switching the embed.twitch.tv slider and reloading. Please feel free to drop your questions into the chat throughout the program, and our guests will answer as many as they can at the end. And if you're comfortable, you can type hello in the chat window now and let us know what part of the world you're watching from. Thank you all for joining Affecting Change, EFF's new live stream series covering some of the biggest topics in digital privacy and free speech. For those of you who aren't familiar with the Electronic Frontier Foundation, EFF is a nonprofit whose technologists, activists, and attorneys have been fighting for your online privacy and free speech since 1990. You are the reason EFF can take on this important work. So if you'd like to help us in the fight to defend your digital freedoms, please consider donating at eff.org/affectingchange. I also want to quickly plug some merch that has just hit our store. To show your support for everyone's right to privacy, bodily autonomy, and choice, you can get one of these swanky tote bags at eff.org/shop. And with that, I'd like to welcome our speakers. Start by introducing my colleagues. We have Daly Barnett, who's a staff technologist at EFF, Haley Sukayama, the Associate Director of Legislative Activism at EFF, and we're also joined by Ajri Perez, an organizer focused on reproductive justice, immigration, and LGBTQ plus issues. And then finally, Cynthia Conti-Cook, the Director of Research and Policy at the Surveillance Resistance Lab. So today we're going to be discussing restrictions to reproductive health care and the choices people seeking and providing abortions must face in the digital age when everything is connected and surveillance is rampant. I'm going to start with a question for Cynthia. So Cynthia, you've done a lot of work on digital rights and surveillance, and in 2020, you wrote a paper discussing this work in the context of reproductive health care. Can you explain how digital rights and reproductive justice intersect and why you wanted to discuss these topics together?
Thank you, Jen, and thank you, Electronic Frontier Foundation, for inviting me to join you today for this discussion. Yes, I wrote about this topic in an article called Surveilling the Digital Abortion Diary in 2020 to really center the existing uses of digital information against prosecuted people and highlight less centered technologies like digital forensic extraction tools and how police were tricking people into consenting to searches of their devices. I wanted to contextualize the threat modeling for digital safety within the specific context of where someone finds themselves in their life, whether that's living in a service desert and not having access to healthcare, living in a criminalized community due to either race or to immigration status, and whether or not you rely on a criminalized economy and how that makes you more vulnerable to being targeted by police. I also had hoped to prevent less good advice like delete your period apps, which went really rampant and literally viral after Dobbs, because it's not the only framing and it really flattens the solution space. I hoped that this research and the analysis could contribute to maybe making it more complex, because the period app, delete your period app kind of advice fails to contextualize digital threats and how policing targets communities differently. It individualizes and simplifies a complex problem and also the solution, and it stifles the potential to really build political will to address the larger ecosystem of harmful surveillance that this is all happening within.
Thanks, Cynthia. Let's drill down a little bit. Daly, what do you see as the biggest surveillance threats currently facing the abortion access movement?
That's a great question. It really depends on who you're asking. I tend to think of at least 3 different communities that I interface with most often, and they all have various threat models. I think of activists and organizers, healthcare professionals, and then just everyday people and the others that they rely on who are navigating reproductive healthcare and working together. So most of us obviously inhabit more than one of those types of personas, but it's important to differentiate the types of threats that they're likely to face. There's privacy invasive social media platforms and search engines, which are two just prominent examples used in criminal cases. For activists and organizers, it's reasonable to add concerns about street-level surveillance like ALPRs and other law enforcement technologies. And then for healthcare professionals, there are electronic health record systems that indicate results of pregnancy beyond the control of either patient or provider, as well as public records, which are used in doxing campaigns coordinated by those forced birth zealots. And then on top of that, there is the passive surveillance of an unregulated data broker industry that's been used to run geolocation surveillance of people traveling in and out of areas near abortion clinics. So the threats really run the full gamut of online technologies, our mobile devices, and on-the-ground street-level technologies. It just depends on who you're asking and which persona you're identifying with on any given day.
Thanks, Daly. This next question is for Audrey. It's easy to miss how digital rights impacts on-the-ground grassroots organizing. Can you describe how the internet or surveillance has impacted your work and the audience that you've been able to reach? Oh, you're muted.
Thanks for letting me know. So yeah, the expansion of technology, I think, has been a really great tool for organizing and for increasing access to information, especially during this time, and especially in some of the most remote parts of the Southwest, which is where a lot of my work has been concentrated. But this increase has also happened without a proportional education on digital privacy and best practices for digital privacy. So there's no longer a world where this organizing around abortion access can happen without extensive education around digital privacy. And this has created an immense limitation, I think, on an unprecedented scale since I first started this work. As someone that has worked most often with Black, Brown, and immigrant communities who are already surveilled and policed and criminalized at higher rates than other communities, over the course of the last 10 years, our work has been significantly reduced. No longer are we able to be as public as we were. No longer are we able to recruit volunteers or new organizers as we had before. Everyone who now does this work needs to be extensively vetted and trained, and that takes time and resources and limits the growth of our organizations and who we're able to reach and how many people we're able to reach through that work in a way that did not exist 10 years ago when I started this work. And so this expansion of technology, however, has also decentralized and individualized some of this work, and that is both a pro and a con, because information in these communities is often accessed through digital devices that can also be quickly turned around to criminalize individuals. And immigrant communities predominantly communicate through WhatsApp with each other, with our networks, and with our families. And sometimes we can be under the illusion that our communications are encrypted when they are not, and they are being communicated to police and law enforcement officials almost in real time. And so even when this work is taken offline and distributed through existing community networks with strong and lasting relationships to each other, without that education on digital security, it can quickly become a threat. And this is especially true in states like Texas and Arizona, where there are politicians that have done absolutely everything they can to target organizations and individuals' data.
Thanks, Audrey. Back to Cynthia. Just looking ahead a little bit, are there certain surveillance technologies that you find particularly concerning that we should be prepared for?
Yes, there certainly are. As Audrey and Daly mentioned, there's already plenty of technologies to be concerned about, whether you're thinking about online technologies or things that are related to the mobile devices that we carry around, or the vast ecosystem of policing technologies that are out there, like license plate readers, etc. But an emerging technology that we've been tracking for some time and that we are increasingly concerned about, specifically as it relates to people who are traveling to seek medical care, which in the news recently this summer, there have been statistics that highlight more people are traveling longer distances, both for reproductive health care as well as for gender affirming care. And so you have more people on the road for longer periods of time. That often additionally means that they have to take more complex routes. Maybe they have to take more than one type of transportation in order to get to where they're going. But if you think about the number of times that your digital identification or your digital driver's license is required in order to travel, um, just consider you have to use it if you are driving a car, if you are renting a car, if you are taking a train, a plane, if you're staying at a hotel, if you are going into a doctor's office, and many other times, many other moments along the way, you often have to prove who you are with some collectively recognized official document. And more states, 30 and counting, are unrolling digital driver's license programs, often without legislative debate, often without legislative restrictions, that allow for the same types of technologies that are um, being used in, for example, license plate readers. The same kind of threats are now getting even closer to us, getting into our digital devices and into our digital wallets. And so the same companies that are making license plate readers are often now also making digital driver's licenses. And because there's no restrictions on how that information that they are potentially able to collect each time that you show your ID to be verified, because there's no restrictions around what the state who issued your ID can do with that information, we have concerns that states that are trying to criminalize travel will try to use that information either to just archive it and have it in case someone is targeted for an investigation, or do what we know they're doing with license plate readers. What we know they're doing with license plate readers is that they are using the data collected from how people drive to generate suspicion and initiate investigations based on one's driving pattern. And in addition, as if all of that is not concerning enough, we also know that digital IDs are being used in at least one state, Louisiana, to also verify adult age in order to access adult content online. And so imagine now that you are in a state where abortion has been criminalized and you are trying to access information online about medical care. You are trying to access information about how to travel for that medical care. You have to verify your identity in order to plan that travel, and you obviously have to use that identity as you travel. It creates a web of digital trails that make it very concerning, especially as we know that many more topics are being targeted for this kind of age verification gatekeeping than just adult content. We should all be very concerned that this national digital ID program essentially that is rolling out, because to lift up the concern that Audrey mentioned, that people who are also migrants and living in immigrant communities, they also have a great deal of surveillance from the Department of Homeland Security to navigate as well. And so these types of technologies specifically, I think, deserve much more attention in how they will create yet another expansion of technology that can be used by the state to surveil people. And it's so far going without any legislative restrictions on how it can be used for that purpose.
Thanks, Cynthia. That's a little terrifying, but I appreciate you putting that on everyone's radar. We've touched on some of the threats people seeking or supporting reproductive care face in the digital age. Now let's pivot to discuss some solutions, including what's currently being done to address these threats and also what more we can all be doing. So I'm going to start with Haley. You do a lot of work with state legislatures, so you have a good understanding of how lawmakers have responded since Roe versus Wade was overturned. What laws have been passed to address reproductive justice through the lens of digital rights and digital surveillance?
Yeah, so certainly since Roe v. Wade was overturned, state legislatures have been really busy on both sides of this issue, right? So as Audrey mentioned, there are some states, of course, that have severely restricted or even effectively banned reproductive care. But we also have seen states where that are more supportive of reproductive rights pass a few different types of laws to try and sort of set their states up as sanctuary states, right, for this kind of care. These fall in a couple of broad categories in terms of what we've seen passed. So there are sort of reproductive shield laws, for example. So these can include like saying, for example, here in California, we're saying, you know, if you're a medical provider in California and you get a subpoena from out of state, that you don't have to comply with that subpoena, right? Like we're going to shield the information, keep it in our state, and not send that information across state lines. We also have a law in California. California is where I'm most comfortable talking, but there are shield laws, of course, in other states. But just again, to use California as an example, we also have a shield law saying that, you know, private entities who may get subpoenas for this kind of data don't have to respond to those subpoenas. So that's one area where we've seen some progress. We've also seen several states try and protect practitioners. So, and I should say at EFF, you know, there've been a lot of expanded, you know, reproductive access laws and stuff that we've seen in various states. At EFF, we're paying particular attention to sort of protections for health data or information that could reveal someone is seeking reproductive care. So that's sort of the nexus where I'm speaking. But anyway, so we've also seen laws that protect practitioners, right? So just again, making sure that they can't be prosecuted out of state, or trying to ensure that we limit the ways that they can be prosecuted out of state for providing services. And we've also seen a lot of attention paid to privacy for electronic health records. So there is a federal health data, there's no federal consumer data privacy law, but there's a federal health data privacy law that makes sure that, tries to ensure that data stays as much as possible within the healthcare system. But even within the healthcare system, you know, if you live in Texas and you're traveling to California, and those two hospitals that, you know, your regular doctor and then the hospital you may go to in California to seek a procedure, sometimes they'll use the same sort of administrative health record system. And so we are trying to figure out ways to make sure that, you know, if you get a medical procedure in a state that supports reproductive care and you live in a state that doesn't support reproductive care, that information isn't showing up with your doctor in your home state, so that you know, you might be reported or something like that. So Maryland and California have both passed electronic health records privacy laws, which I know it sounds really weedy, but it's like one area that we're actually really concerned about, because I think there's historically been a lot of attention paid to trying as much as possible to keep health data within the healthcare system. But now we're seeing, you know, with different states having different regimes, watching that data kind of slosh around within the systems can be pretty concerning. So those are a few of the types of laws that we've successfully seen pass. There's still more work to do. I think it's been very interesting to hear lawmakers. I think lawmakers in states that support reproductive rights have been very sensitive to this issue, but they aren't as sensitive to hearing the argument that, as all of the panelists have talked about, like data that isn't traditionally considered health data can also implicate you, right? Can also show that you're seeking care. So location data was brought up, automated license plate readers, communications information, all of that. So while lawmakers have been pretty receptive to hearing that we want to protect reproductive data or health data, defining that has been quite difficult. And so we would really like to see sort of more general laws protecting location data. Massachusetts had a great bill, the Location Shield Act, which would have prevented the sale of cell phone location information to data brokers, for example. That unfortunately did not pass this session, but I do expect to see it come up again. So it's been a little bit difficult to sort of communicate how the kind of wealth of data and the existing digital trails that we are leaving everywhere can have implications for people who are seeking reproductive care. And so that's been a messaging project for us, and it's actually been really great to work with folks in the reproductive justice space who have been talking to folks for a long time, who know these issues really well, and sort of sharing our knowledge and our information and our strategies. Because I think we do really all need to come together to make sure that we're protecting people as much as possible and plugging all these holes, because there are a lot of them.
Thanks, Haley. It's good to hear that there's at least some progress being made on the legislative front, though obviously more to be done. Obviously, though, we're not all lawmakers, so I want to discuss what we can do at the individual level and the grassroots level to help protect digital rights in a post-Roe world. So this question is for each panelist. What can people on this call do to better protect themselves and the abortion access movement? And I will just call on people to make it easier. Haley, do you want to kick it off?
Yeah, sure. So you're right, we're not all lawmakers, but we all have lawmakers, and technically they do work for you. So I really do encourage people to reach out to lawmakers in your state, especially right now. A lot of sessions have stopped, state sessions have stopped, and we're seeing folks starting to think about ideas for next session. Most sessions start in January, so they have to get their ideas from somewhere. It may as well be from you. So please, call your local lawmakers if you're concerned about this issue. Talk to them about what your concerns are. I often find with lawmakers, especially if they hear from someone in their district, like personal stories really matter. So if you have a personal story that you're willing to share, obviously this is really sensitive stuff, but I think privacy in general can feel very abstract to people who are not steeped in the privacy world. And so if you can kind of say, like, as an anecdote, right, like, this is what happened to me, this is what happened to someone that I know, that can carry a lot of weight with a legislator or a staff member. And then, of course, if you hear about good policies to support or bad policies to oppose, don't be afraid to make your voice heard. They have to listen to you. It is their job. So we highlight as many proposals as we can, that we find are really good or that are concerning in our action center at EFF. But just keep your ear to the ground and don't be afraid to reach out to your lawmakers.
Thanks. Audrey, do you want to go next?
Yeah, so I think talking to lawmakers is really important. Coming from years of being in Texas and talking to my lawmakers, I just want to emphasize that elections are so super important because they set the stage for how receptive those lawmakers are going to be to the issues that you want to talk to them about. I think it's also really important to note that in the last 11 years or so, the overturn window has shifted so far to the right. And so much of that is because of the first Trump administration that took us from this period of what felt like progress from one where we won this whole women's health case at the Supreme Court right before that election. And that was maybe the first win that we had in the abortion access movement for a long time. And we went from that to a Trump election, to the announcing of January that he was going to target abortion access, that he was going to target immigrants, that he was going to target transgender individuals and bodily autonomy as a whole. And now that we are 8 years out from, or 8 or 7 years out from that January that he came into office, we can see that he held true to all of those promises, right? And so it cannot be, I think, overstated or understated enough that elections matter. And this next election has the potential to further shift the overturn window to the right in a way that will impact every area of our lives. And I am very deeply concerned already that we will not be able to recover from the first shift that we experienced. And so voting is the smallest and the easiest thing that someone can do to prevent that window from moving further right. And in a world where we are outspent by our opponents and our opposition, one of the best resources that we have is ourselves, and donating our time and our money strategically to organizations that support our values, or to volunteer strategically in the states and in the elections and the races where it matters the most, to be able to impact the overall, chessboard of what is going to be able to be possible in these next 4 years. Because we have a potential to correct that if we concentrate and focus our election in the swing states where it matters the most. And unfortunately, I don't like that this system is built this way, right? It is deeply, deeply unfair. But it also means that there is a very clear-cut strategy that we can use to win and to advance progress. So to that end, another thing that people can do is join an advocacy organization, because if you don't do this work full time, accessing information on how to take action in a way that aligns with your values can be very time consuming, and it's not something that people have the time and energy to do every day. So one way to combat that is to join an advocacy organization, either at the national, the state, or the local level. And those organizations can help provide a North Star on how to take action in accordance with your values, and can also help you triage some of the most urgent needs for that moment and help redirect energy towards the actions that are the most effective and the most useful to impact change. And lastly, I think that the most important thing that anybody can do is get to know their neighbors. Like, both quite literally, get to know the people that live in your neighborhood, get to know the people that live around you, be able to ask some of your neighbors for a cup of sugar or a lemon if you need it for a recipe, and you can start there and then get to a place where you can learn about like when, where, and how you can share information about abortion access to keep everybody in your network and in your neighbors' networks safe and informed.
Thanks, Audrey. Cynthia, do you want to go next?
Yes, thank you. And plus to what Audrey said about getting to know your neighbors. It's so important, because what data brokers and dictators alike all know but want us to forget is how powerful our relationships are, and how valued our communication with each other is as a force multiplier. They certainly know the value of it. We can double down on committing to those deep relationships, again, with your neighbors, with your family, with people that are in the movement space with you, to commit to figuring out amongst trusted folks how you want to communicate and how you want to protect each other, and what kind of threat models you might want to consider that you yourselves are in, or that various people in your network are in, so that you know how to protect each other if there is some sort of crisis and you need to be able to protect your important conversations. If you need help having those conversations, of course, EFF has a lot of amazing resources. And also there are a lot of resources from the Digital Defense Fund, which has been teaching people about how to navigate abortion access in hostile digital space for years. I think that we can also just ask each other, especially as we prepare to talk to our lawmakers, as we come up with ideas to pitch to our lawmakers, as we come up with broader types of solutions to the larger surveillance ecosystem that we're all living in. How do we actually cultivate a feeling of digital rights in our bones? It's not something that will happen overnight, and it's not something that will happen in isolation if we just delete our period app and feel like we are going to go about our lives and not think about it again. When we start thinking and talking about it together, and think and talk about what's at stake in our communities and our families and our movements, like what Audrey said about not being able to be as bold with the outreach strategies or getting as many volunteers as we used to be able to get. Think about all of those consequences of the digital environment that we have been organizing in. And only when we can really feel it can we begin to truly fight for it.
Thanks, Cynthia. Daly.
Well, I spend most of my workday thinking about digital privacy and security for activist movements, especially those operating on shifting legal territory. So I'll stay in my lane a little bit and just talk about that. In terms of digital privacy and keeping your data in your control, I always recommend starting with the non-technical strategies first. It's the easiest for pretty much everyone to comprehend, regardless of their technical savvy. So just being careful about the choices you make, about what you're saying and where. And then you can start to think about which technologies you're using and when, compartmentalizing activities that require more care towards data security, towards information control, away from the more regular activities. This can look like, in a more technical sense, choosing multiple browsers of various privacy and security versus the convenience that they offer, using separate email addresses, strong, unique passwords, etc. And as you get more technical and ready to enact more specific strategies for your threat model, I recommend checking out the Surveillance Self-Defense website. We have a playlist of guides there that I curated especially for the abortion access movement and kind of touching on those various threat models I described earlier, as well as checking out Digital Defense Fund. I am ever grateful for our collaboration with them and the work I get to contribute there. And also just check out my byline on the EFF blog. I've written a number of posts there about the threats facing abortion access movement, what we learned over the past 3 years of doing this at EFF, and then the work I came from before. And I think generally too, the good news is that there are a lot of people out there building these resources and sharing this knowledge. And on that note, I'm really given hope by cross-movement organizing that's happening. There are sex worker right advocates, harm reduction activists, disability justice, racial justice, trans liberation activists. There's all this cross-pollination of knowledge and safety techniques being shared, especially between those who are used to living and working within these criminalized economies, these criminalized spaces. And as Audrey mentioned earlier, so eloquently, I come from a similar school of thought that liberation is sought through building community. And I'm really hopeful in that sense. I'm really grateful that there are a lot of people who maybe previously didn't consider how abortion access affected their particular lives and are now waking up to the connections it shares with other movements that they care about. And all these different communities have developed different strategies of momentum and survival, and I'm just really grateful for the cross-pollination of knowledge and resource sharing that's taking place.
Can I add one thing to that? So I forgot to mention, I wanted to highlight the Plan C website because it does a really good job at giving an explainer at the very top of the website on 5 things that you can do to better protect your digital privacy. And it does so in a way that I think is really accessible for people who are just coming into this conversation and who are obviously going onto the Plan C website to access for abortion access. And that this is something that we can all do in the spaces that we are a part of or in the organizations that we are a part of, is include a piece of information on digital security and how to protect our communities so that people are able to access that information regardless of what information they're trying to access, and not specifically only for abortion access information. We can just incorporate digital security into every aspect of our lives so that we have this information and we're ready to use it when we need to.
Awesome. Thanks, everybody, for the insightful discussion. I want to leave some time to get the audience's questions, so I'm going to turn to the questions that have been submitted on the chat. And to everyone watching, please feel free to keep the questions coming so our panelists can get you some answers. As a first question, how would you respond to people who say that the use of digital evidence to prosecute abortion seekers or providers is purely speculative and hypothetical at this point?
I'm happy to answer that, to say that it's not speculative or hypothetical at all. In fact, it has been sort of common, at least starting in 2014 after the Supreme Court's decision in Riley. There was an explosion of digital forensics extraction tools that were that the federal government provided grant money for local police departments to obtain. And starting or shortly after 2014, it became really common in every type of case. I'm talking everything from murder to petty larceny. At least in New York City, there was a digital forensics review and analysis of someone's digital evidence from their phone. And so it was really, really common in any type of mundane, routine, misdemeanor to felony for that type of information to be extracted. And in 2017, also I believe in 2015, there's 2 different cases that were accusing women of conduct related to the terminations of their pregnancy. And in one case, someone's Google searches were used against her, even though they were more than 6 months old. And in another case, there was emails and purchase history and website history also used against her. So sadly, these are not hypothetical speculations whatsoever. However, I do think that when you have something that goes viral, like delete your period app, that type of speculation about how, the omission of like when you got your period in an app like that, that's not the kind of information that's most likely to be sought by prosecutors. It's not very valuable. It doesn't do a lot of labor inside of a case. What does a lot of labor inside of a prosecution is evidence that they can pull from a device you interact with every single day, and that you ask really personal, private questions about your health. That kind of information is really valuable to prosecutors because it supplies them with what they often don't have in these types of cases, which is intent evidence. Because our digital devices do such a detailed job of reflecting what is going on in our heads, whether it's private thoughts that we're having, questions that we're asking because of conditions that we're facing, or whether it's private communications, mother-daughter communications happened in Nebraska, and police were able to subpoena Facebook for their corporate archives of those conversations and use that as evidence to prosecute people for abortion. The circumstances that we're living in with the corporate archives that are indefinitely collecting our intimate conversations and our intimate thoughts create the inevitable opportunity for prosecutors and police to try to get at those thoughts, to fill in that intent element gap that they so often have when they're trying to accuse people of conduct related to the terminations of their pregnancy.
Thanks, Cynthia. Do anyone else have thoughts on this question? All right. This is from EFF Ben. Is there also an Overton window shift on surveillance? And could the Dobbs decision help activists, whether privacy or reproductive rights or both, move the law on surveillance?
I want to chime in for a bit. I think Cynthia is actually more equipped to answer this question. And I think that she touched on it a little bit in her previous answer, right? These like surveillance technologies have been used on migrant and immigrant communities for years. And specifically, they are used most often in situations where somebody is embedded with a criminal justice system, right? And in any situation where somebody is facing criminalization, they are subject to greater surveillance and scrutiny. And so the Overton window really is in shifting towards increasing the number of people and the categories of people that are able to be criminalized for a number of different behaviors. And that is what we have to keep an eye out for, is where is it moving to next and how is it going to expand. But it's the same old dog, just learning new tricks, actually, to go against the grain of the saying.
Oh, Cynthia, you're on mute.
I guess what I could add is to say, yes, sure, it may be an opportunity to bring more people into the conversation about the types of digital surveillance tools that we sort of swim through every day, but are often unaware of it. However, at the same time that more of us have that entry ramp into understanding the conditions of policing and surveillance that we live under, and also understanding the politicization of criminalization and how it's been used as a tool to target and to remove people from the political community, I think that we have opportunities, surely, to bring more awareness and concern around surveillance technologies. But in doing so, we need to center and learn from the lessons that a lot of people in criminalized economies, criminalized communities, and in migrant communities have already spelled out for us about the dangers of surveillance. And if we don't pay attention to the last at least decade of harmful impacts that advocates in the criminal legal system space and in the immigration legal space, if we don't pay attention to the lessons they have taught us about what it means to have private sector tech vendors serving the public sector and the types of obstacles that that presents to being able to have a democratic debate about it, we're going to miss out on really being able to substantively, meaningfully expand the levels of concern in order to gather the political will and accumulate the power that we actually need to confront the business model of the tech industry, and nothing less.
Yeah, and if I could just add, I mean, just to respond to the question, I think so. Big pluses to everything that both of you just said. I think one thing that I have been heartened with, in doing this work, we come from a tech policy background. We have a kind of a deep but narrow view on a lot of these issues, and we've really been able to build bridges, I think, with a lot of advocacy communities that, I mean, they're dealing with so many things, and now they're like, oh, now we also have to think about data privacy, and it's like it's been really valuable for me to come in and learn from each other and really say, like, okay, tell me where you've been and what you've learned, and how can I help? Like, I think that's been really good. So I have seen in many states, right, sort of groups coming together that have been working maybe in parallel, but haven't actually been working together, really seeing those intersections come together, really learning from each other, learning tactics from each other, learning lessons from each other. In that way, I think there is a shift, maybe just within the advocacy community, at least, of just being like, this issue is all of our issues, right? Like there are echoes here, and we have to learn from each other and listen to each other.
Thanks, everyone. This question is from, and I apologize if I'm saying any of these names wrong, from Jones Monica. Are there ways to thwart data brokers from using geolocation data, for example, turning off geolocation or encrypting it?
I can chime in here. Unfortunately, there's not a ton you can do. I mean, well, so as long as your cell phone is on and communicating with the cell towers in your area, wherever you're going to and from, it's going to communicate the device ID as it goes along, which can be triangulated back to you just based on that. There are ways that you can restrict the methods that it can be triangulated back to you. So if you're kind of looking far out into the ecosystem of how this information kind of snowballs together to create a scary portrait of who you are in the digital space, you can turn off the ad identifier on your phone so that the applications you use aren't able to identify your behavior with your device ID, which can then, cross-pollinate all the information that's being gathered in the data broker realm, the clouds. Or quite simply, you can turn off your phone. You can know when to turn it off or turn it onto airplane mode, or just prevent its communication from pinging those cell towers in your area. There are more technical ways. There are some really fancy footed ways to go about, like masking the device ID, or to like randomize it with special things, or like having burner phones and things. But those are that's kind of like advanced level security stuff that not everyone has access to. And I'm about making operational security accessible to everyone.
Thanks, Daly. And I'll add that that's like the technical things that people can do themselves, but there have been attempts, so far not very successful, but there are more and more attempts to try to pass laws to regulate this sensitive information, so that people don't have to worry about it themselves. And there's policies that keep corporations from collecting it in the first place, or from how it's sold and shared or retained. So yeah, there's been several proposals and work towards making that happen too. This question is from Fritzer, 1992. For application developers, are there better jurisdictions to host data and services? How can we avoid bulk subpoena and collection?
I could chime in again here, just at least on the technical angle about avoiding bulk subpoena and collection. You can do your due diligence to make sure that when you do get subpoenaed, you have nothing good to give them. So what you do give them is crap. It's useless. So that means you could have really good encryption at rest standards, so that it's totally encrypted when you hand it over. Or you can have really good data retention policies. So you could regularly purge your records that aren't necessary for the operations to continue. And that way, when the feds or whoever come knocking on your door, you can say, here's all the nothing I have. That would be good. And then, of course, whatever policies you do enact, make sure you make those policies really transparent to your users so that they know what kind of technologies they are accessing and what kind of information they are privileging it with.
If I could, I'd also encourage folks who are in a position to think about data collection. Like, what do you actually need, right? So not only deleting stuff regularly and all that, but like just not taking more than you need. I think we've all been able to illustrate like why information that you may think is innocuous can actually be really sensitive and really important to someone. And so just thinking through, do I really need this, is a big step.
Thanks, everybody. This question is from Baking Soda Buzz. Are there initiatives to educate marginalized communities about using Tor, especially given potential increased surveillance of reproductive rights after the November election?
I feel like this question is in my wheelhouse. Not enough, I would say. Certainly not enough. I think that this is something that has come up only recently in the past couple of years, and hopefully something that we will continue to increase access to education on. Unfortunately, again, we are strapped for time, resources, and money, and I think always trying to respond to what the most present fire of the moment is. And for the past 2 years, I think, especially when it comes to abortion access and gender affirming care, it has been trying to get as many people over the finish line as possible while we have the time and the space and the ability to do so. And I think from there, increasing the access to digital privacy information and education is definitely going to be one of the next, if not current, steps that are happening.
Anyone else?
I'll just add that yes, it's so important to have more access to this really vital information, especially at the moment, due to the hostility of the digital environment that we operate in. And also, it's so important to know that it's not going to solve the problems that we're really facing. And so while digital safety and expanding information access to people in all sorts of communities who need to access digital spaces for various reasons is really important, so is understanding that it's way too much of a burden for any individual to hold, for any organization, especially our small organizations, to hold and be able to maintain in crisis mode. Because what happens when you're in crisis mode is that you want to go to that app that you know will ping, to that notification you know you're going to get, to that ability that you have, really like to that access that you know you have with someone that is streamlined and easy because you're in crisis mode. And in my previous life as an attorney representing a lot of people who were in the midst of crisis, I know that people default to the easiest types of tools to use when they are navigating a lot of other difficulties. And so yes, in crisis mode, for folks that are in this situation, it's important to have this information readily available so that they have a hint that there's other ways to access information more safely. And also, we can't put that burden on them. We have to actually internalize this in a way that, again, accumulates the political will to actually change the conditions that we're operating in.
I also want to add that I think, and this is outside of abortion access necessarily, but in LGBTQ spaces and in trans spaces, trans people never really achieved a status of full equality in this country to begin with. And so transgender people have always been operating under the guise that we were under attack or imminently under attack. And there are some in migrant communities and immigrant communities as well, right? And so there is, as Cynthia said before, a lot to learn from these people who have already, and myself included, I'm both an immigrant and a trans person, from how we have been operating already under the existing laws of this country. And I think that there are communities that have the solutions and the knowledge that we need to move forward, regardless of what the future brings.
Thanks. This question is from Warlord Elite. I feel like digital privacy and digital rights need to be taught at a younger age as a needed life skill, especially given the rise of algorithmic AI and predictive data. In the future, such services as Copilot Plus and Google's Gemini are now being built in and enabled on devices, giving unrestricted data access to everything on your screen. How do we protect ourselves and prepare for this new device access?
I can chime in on this one a little bit. I'm chewing on what Cynthia and Audrey just said about this sort of the social aspects of digital privacy, like data safety, community safety, and how the things interplay together. And I think there is a lot to be said there towards this question as well, which is that we have a lot of choice individually and in our communities about which technologies we're privileging with the information we use. We do not need Copilot and Google Gemini to survive, to seek liberation. We are privileging these things, and sometimes they do affect our work, or sometimes they do enhance our work. But a lot of the times, the convenience that they offer is bought through the invasion of privacy that they impose on our lives. So choose wisely. Free technology is rarely free. It's usually bought through like advertising and ad tracking and behavioral tracking. So I hope and I believe that there already is, and I hope there will be more push for conscious decision making, conscious product choice, technology choice, and a greater push towards the re-socialization of information security and data privacy instead of the typical antisocial, cold, very privileged spaces that information and resources typically run in. Yeah.
Thanks, Celie. All right. This is from Clayton Tucker TX. A number of the bills attempting to protect people's digital information in the wake of Dobbs' decision have provisions that give people the right to delete online information about themselves. However, big tech is trying to insert unrestricted data flow guarantees into binding international trade agreements, which could nullify these provisions. Can you please talk a bit about how so-called digital trade rules undermine personal privacy?
So I can start to take a stab at this one with the caveat that I don't do much international work. I mostly focus on states, but I think this question gets to a very common kind of mentality we see among lawmakers, that sharing is caring. We want to share as much data as we possibly can. I think that is often sort of people's initial mindset when they're thinking about, they tend to think, when they're thinking about trade agreements, they tend to think about all the good things that can happen from data sharing. And I think it is really important to raise all the concerns we have about data privacy in these spaces as much as we possibly can. So definitely when we see trade agreements, we're invited to talk about them, just to make sure that people are even thinking about privacy or about the way that information can be used in ways that people don't expect. We certainly, again, see even, in the health space, right? Like they just think, if we share as much information as we possibly can, that's going to help patient outcomes, that's going to help all these things. And that may be true, but you have to do it in a specific way, or you have to do it in a way that's responsible, in a way that you're making sure that people are okay with that kind of information sharing, that they're expecting it. And so I think in general, at EFF, we have what we call a privacy first approach, right? So when we're looking at a lot of these hard problems, there are a lot of things that we say, really, if you just put in strong consumer privacy or just privacy rules in general, you can deal with a lot of the issues that come up. So I do think this question does kind of indicate, or it sort of speaks to a very common mindset that we see, particularly lawmakers and regulators take. And so I think it's really just a matter of raising the alarm as much as we possibly can.
Thanks, Haley. All right, I think we have time for just one last question. What do you see as the future for this movement? How will reproductive justice change in the near future, and how will digital civil liberties affect that?
I can jump in just to say that what I'm really excited about in terms of both the challenges and the opportunities that our digital, the hostility of our digital environment invites us to is to really create cross-movement solidarity. We all, as Audrey said, are learning from those of us who have gone before us in navigating the harms of having society target you for criminalization specifically. And so whether we're bringing in a strong cross-movement solidarity conversation around digital safety or around the types of changes that we all want to see to make the conditions in this country better for us all and also for around the world, it gives us the ability to have those conversations started around something like digital safety, but then maybe build into something about what it would look like to be able to protect democratic power globally in order to be able to harness the global power that is the tech industry. So it's an invitation, and it is a moment that we can all, as we learn how to share and hold each other in the various struggles that have more in common than they don't, it gives us the solution space to think bigger and to think of each other and to hold each other in inclusive and supportive and difficult ways.
Thank you, Cynthia. All right. Well, that is all we have time for. I want to thank Audrey, Cynthia, Daly, and Haley for joining us today. And thank you to everyone who contributed to the discussion in the chat, all the great questions, and everybody watching. Digital rights begins with you. EFF has been a leader in privacy, freedom of expression, and innovation for 34 years, and we need your help to keep up the fight. Become a member today at EFF.org/affectingchange. You can also support digital rights and reproductive justice with items from our store at EFF.org/shop, including that really awesome tote bag that we showed. Oh, there it is again. We hope you will continue these conversations about your civil liberties with your colleagues and your friends. And we will see you at our next Affecting Change live stream, How to Protest with Privacy in Mind, on October 17th. Find out more at EFF.org/affectingchange series. Thanks for joining us, and see you next time.